Greetings, human beings, and welcome back to Apartment 303, a podcast for community fans. My name is Dave, and alongside my co-host Adam, we are here to discuss all things community and why we love it so much. On today's episode, we are officially celebrating the 1-year anniversary of Apartment 303. Adam and I will be pulling back the curtain to share production insights and discuss favorite moments from our first year of adventures in this amazing podcast community. Before we get there, though, Adam, I have to ask, how are you, where are you, and how have you been spending your summer break, my friend?
You know, it's interesting that you refer to it as a summer break. That is exactly what it has been for me, albeit unintentionally. I was rear-ended when I was driving, and for those of you who know, my Vanna White, has been my mobile home since the first of the year. And it turns out that after a month of talking with insurance and finger pointing and phone calling, that Vanna has been totaled. So that's very unfortunate. And she was the best mobile podcast recording vehicle that I could have asked for, but it looks like I'm going to have to begin a next chapter. Fortunately, no one was badly hurt in the accident, and also, fortunately, I was in Seattle, which is my adopted hometown, so I've been very fortunate that I've had places to stay and people to see and just amazing summer weather.
All right, let's get right into it. Here we are in August of 2021. We released our very first episode last year on July 11th. So, since the release of our last episode, we have celebrated the 1-year anniversary of our podcast. And in that year, we have somehow put out 23 episodes. Today, though, I want to go through our insights and highlights, and I think the best approach here is almost certainly a chronological one. Right off the bat, our very first episode that we put out last July was Introduction to Podcasting.
Very creative title there.
Yeah, very, very creative title. I do want to play a clip for our listeners of you and Scott first introducing yourself, because that's one that always gets me and will always stick in my head here. So before we get farther in, I want to tee that up for people. Greetings, human beings, and welcome to the very first episode of Apartment 303, a podcast for community fans. We are here to discuss and debate all things community, attempting to delve into each and every layer of the show, what makes it work, and why we love it. My name is Dave, and while I'll mostly be working behind the scenes, you will hear me making Dean-like pop-ins, mainly to interject randomly or tee up episodes. So, without further ado, please allow me to introduce the first of our co-hosts, Scott. Scott, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into community?
Hey Dave, thank you. My name is Scott and I am a Scorpio. I got into community by a friend introducing me in college. This was probably fall of 2009 and I've been a fan ever since. Also with us is my good friend Adam, who I discuss community with frequently enough that he decided to spark a podcast. Adam, what's up?
My name is Alex. It's actually not, but I do operate with a fierce Starburns energy at times. And I watched Community. I was turned on to it by my brother. And just really, as soon as I realized what the show was and how immersive it was and how it's its own totally separate entity, it was really easy to get sucked in from the brilliant writing and the brilliant performances. It's exactly why 8-10 years after the initial episode, the pilot, we're still talking about it today, and it feels just as relevant now as it ever was.
So yeah, obviously your name is not Alex.
No, but I've been called Alex before.
Yes, no, I think both you and Scott exceeded my expectations for what I asked of you guys to do in that original segment where you were introducing yourself. So right off the bat, that was a fun one for me. From a production point, the first episode is really hard for me to go back and listen to, not just because of everything, right? Anytime you're looking at your own work retrospectively, but on the first episode, I had made a decision to include background music. And part of that was because of my own insecurities as, an amateur producer, trying to get the background noise, trying to get everyone straightened out there, kind of. But it didn't take a year for me to go back and realize that that wasn't really the feel that we were going for. So that's actually the only episode of the show that has background music persistently throughout the show. We have our intro and outro, and we will use music to transition from topics or from time to time. So yeah, that's my big production side insight for this episode. Before I get too far carried away from my other takeaways, was there anything from this episode that really stood out to you going back to revisit it all this time later?
Really for me, in terms of content, because obviously I did very little on the production side of things, and thank you so much for that. Can't thank you enough. But for me, obviously, it's an introduction episode, and we've introduced ourselves at this point, but I also really enjoyed the concept of referring to Community, as I did, as kind of an anti-sitcom, because it simultaneously is a love letter / homage to sitcoms, but also it challenges you and your assumptions about them and what it can be, and as we'll talk about later on in further content, just sort of subverting expectations. And this was really poignant because, not in the way that I phrased it necessarily, but because at the table read at the time, Donald Glover referred to it as Community was punk and subversive. And that really resonated with me on, just a lot of levels. I was just glad to hear Donald Glover talk about Community again, but also because that really felt like it spoke truth to what this show was. And fast forward almost a year later, when we are asked to appear as guests on Alex's The Story of Community podcast, I brought that up again amongst all the other podcasters, and there's a really nice consensus there of, oh yeah, this thing could be good because it's not popular. And I think that really embodied Community the entire way through. So just to call that out in the very first episode, I think was very important.
So yeah, it's wild that that's something that came out in our very first episode, because that is a theme that has carried really throughout our show. So our second episode was Introduction to Film Deconstruction. Again, quite a mouthful. This is something that will always stick in my head from that episode, and it's something that's kind of weird and random, but in this episode you refer to a travel by map adventure.
Yes.
A la the Muppets,
right,
might come to mind. And that is a phrase that I have never been able to get out of my head since then. I've always liked adventure and those types of things, but there's just something about that phrase that kind of gives it, I don't know if it's like a nostalgic adventure feel or a very just engaged and social feel. Maybe that's what it is, and why it connects so much for Community to me. But I've actually started using that phrase in my life and certainly in my brain ever since you brought it out.
So it's verbal wildfire, is that what you're saying? It's caught on, it's like Streets Ahead?
Yes, it is verbal wildfire, my friend.
Coined and minted.
So that was just a fun takeaway that I had from the episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to set up pitching the movie?
Yeah, well, it was just kind of a fun thing that we did. It was, again, not necessarily a super original thought, but there was a really fun element, especially when Scott was on the show, because we could get him going on different tangents and things. There was a lot of, we haven't discussed this. We know what the prompt is, but we haven't fleshed out a conversation around it. So our creative juices got flowing in some really interesting ways that, I didn't even expect as the prompt was rolling off the tongue initially. So I think that there's definitely some legs, and now that we know that Dan is working on a script, I think we need to send this to him and make sure that, because for me, this is a pretty fun way to really bring back some beloved characters potentially.
All right, episode 3 for us was a big one for me. I feel like we'd grown a lot in the first 2 episodes. We were still very much in the same space topically, but in the 3rd episode we had something come up that also became a recurring thing in our podcast. I didn't remember this originally happening, and I discovered this going back through, but in this episode you and Scott are discussing the pilot, and
yes,
you're talking about the scene with the lunch lady where she asked Jeff if he is going to pay for his taco Seinfeld.
He was conditioned to pay for his tacos.
Yes, he was conditioned. That's the word. And you said something about how, I think it was on Netflix, that scene has been edited out for time.
Yeah, right.
I completely forgot about this. I listened to this episode 100 times, editing it when we made it, completely forgot about this. Later on in the show, the second episode of this year, when we had Darcy and Solomon on, we were doing an episode about underknown, lesser-known characters from the show.
Yes,
and
right.
Someone pointed out that Patricia Belcher was, in Seinfeld and in that scene, and so that this Seinfeld taco saga apparently was not just a one-off, and has popped its head up multiple times throughout the course of our first year.
And if I can tag onto that real briefly here, I was minding my own business and casually happened by a TV that was on, and there she was. Patricia Belcher was just like pruning her garden on the show, and I was like, oh, this is,
she's in everything. But that was definitely one that has now crept up on me, not once but twice in the course of our show. It's just one of those cool, weird, random things. So this episode is also where Scott and you do your character breakdowns in terms of what percentage of each character you identify with.
So for you, how do you break down these characters and how you see yourself in them?
In terms of just like breaking down percentage-wise, I am very confident that I'm predominantly Brita, so somewhere in the 40 to 50% range. And I would say that even though they're totally opposite characters, probably the next highest for me is Annie. Just in terms of that kind of type A, super wound tight kind of perfectionist. I have a lot of those type of tendencies in myself. So those are the two primary percentages for me. And beyond that, Abed is probably next in the 10 to 15% range. And I'm losing track of my numbers and my math here. I should have had a spreadsheet ready. I want to be more like Troy because Troy's the best character in this show.
Fast forward about a year later, I was asked the same question when I was a guest on the Greendale Human Podcasters show.
The other question that we generally ask our guests is, who do you relate to in Community? Like, who are you in regards to the main characters? I don't care if you say Starburns, but out of the people, like we've had everyone relates to Jeff and Abed in a way. So that's, feel free to go there. But we've kind of had a Professor Duncan, which is great because we had someone British, and then we had
because he was British.
Hey, that counts. That's something.
I'm taking it.
Counts. Yeah.
If I can get the whole cast over this podcast, that will be fantastic.
So there's definitely some Starburns in there. I'm glad you mentioned him. My younger days. The answer for me is very simple. I'm Britta, the dude, basically.
Oh, nice.
I have all of Annie's insecurities, but none of her strengths, so I don't want to claim too much of Annie.
Yeah.
I kind of feel the same way about Troy. Yeah, in terms of cookie cutter builds, you can pretty easily think of me as the Britta.
Nice.
Okay, that's interesting. I
always
really
mean
good.
well, but oftentimes my heart eclipses my execution. Later on in this episode is the first kind of confrontation between you and Scott, certainly a disagreement. In one of the first two episodes, Scott had kind of made a throwaway comment about the pilot not being that funny, and you kind of let it go at the time and was like, okay, I'm going to let that go for now, but we come back
and this was the episode, I told him to get off my lawn.
In this episode, you go full Pierce on us because
I had a prepared statement.
Yes, I asked you if you have anything to say about that, and you're like, no, I don't. In fact, what I have is...
For my opening remarks, I have a prepared statement.
Oh,
now,
God.
As you all will recall, in the first episode of Apartment 303, a place designed to be a safe haven and forum to discuss all things community, mind you, my co-host attempted to besmirch the good name of this beloved television program. He made the audacious, unfounded claim the pilot episode was, and I quote, "If we're being honest, the first episode really isn't that funny." Now, I sincerely apologize for spouting such blasphemous language, but Scott's words, not mine, and I am only repeating them. So, before I go full Jeremy Soulpatch Simmons, Scott is partially right. The pilot is not one of the top 10 funniest episodes of Community. However, that is not to say that it's not funny at all. I would like to view this episode kind of like it's a leadoff hitter on a baseball team. It's setting up the table for other things to come later. And I specifically came across, there's another video out there on YouTube I had seen. A guy named Justin Cook from the Cook Films had done an episode on what he considered the best episode of Community, and points out that the Community is at its best when it combines comedy and emotion. And I think he's very right about that. In order to get that point, though, you have to sort of plant the seeds of emotional investment. And that's really what the first few episodes of Community do well, particularly the pilot. I have taken a look and gone over, and I'll say that the pilot episode is the one I've watched the most times. And I went through and I realized that for pretty much all of the characters, there is one specific joke, or in some cases 2 or 3, that are not only funny, but they also really clearly set the tone for this is what this character is going to be like. So it's a really nice way to sum up, I guess, the Greendale 7 for the most part.
All right, so our 4th episode we did Rhythm and Rhyme 101, all about music. Glad we did that 101 style, because that is the first topic that we did that I feel like we're going to do again. We barely scratched the surface in that episode of all the great music from the show. There were a couple insights I wanted to give from the production side, and that was my terrible time trying to learn Daybreak for this episode. Throughout the first few episodes, I'd kind of been playing with different versions of bad covers of songs from the show, partially because I'm not that good at music, and partially because I was worried about copyright, so it seemed like a really good space to occupy. But for this episode, being a music episode, I was really inspired, and I wanted to learn Daybreak, and I did. It doesn't quite feel Daybreak-y with 2 guitars. It really does need more. But it was a fun experience. I can now say that I have personally paid Michael Haggins $6.50 in my professional career as a podcaster and amateur musician. So that was a lot of fun.
Needs more cowbell.
Yeah, it needed a lot of things. There's a reason we haven't brought it back. Perhaps one day, if I do it better justice. I think I probably spent more time on that than I did the whole rest of the episode.
Yeah, I really enjoyed early on. We were trying to play with what you wanted to use as the intro song, and you did a version of Pillar of Garbage, which we ended up adopting, and Daybreak was good. If I Die Before You, I believe you did that one as well. And early on, that was just kind of a lot of fun, figuring out our footing and what we wanted the podcast to be and what the staples were going to be was really fun for me as well.
Yeah, the second episode was actually getting rid of Britta, which ended up not sticking around, because in the next episode we acquire what became our permanent intro to complement our permanent outro. But before we completely close the book on this episode, there was something that I wanted to bring up. You hadn't included it in your notes, and I guess maybe if I was in your shoes, I could see that. But as a producer, I'm invoking executive privilege here. I really enjoyed the story about when you met Joel.
Sure.
Which apparently was somehow not a story that you had told Scott before.
I don't know how that slipped. So I guess it had not.
The fact that the first time you told Scott that story was live on our was live on our podcast was pretty amazing to me, because, you guys were community friends long before the point where you invited him to be your professional community partner.
Since you got to pick 2 by default, I really would like to hang out with Ken Jeong and Joel McHale. When I first heard they were doing a podcast together, I kind of thought it would be an unlikely pairing almost.
Yeah.
But then you have to remember Ken Jeong is not Chang.
Yep, exactly right.
And that speaks to how good of an actor he is and what he brings to that character. So I would just love to have a conversation with him. Joel McHale is a lot more easygoing and laid back than I would have thought.
I told you by the time I met Joel, right?
What I mostly remember is he was a nice dude.
So that's what it came down to. He was doing stand-up at the University of Kentucky when I was at grad school there. It was a really good stand-up, and I had nothing to do the next day, so we just waited. My friend Kevin and I, shout out to Kevin, we waited, and he does not have Changnesia. It's a different guy.
I was about to ask, does he have Changnesia?
So we hung out afterward, and there were, I don't know, maybe 5 people outside the Singletary Center there after the show, and the people walking Joel to his car said, "Hey, no, you all need to disperse," or something along those lines. And Joel kind of cut him off. He said, "They're fine. They're totally fine." So he talked to us for a couple minutes, and we were just like in a little group there, and it was super cold out. He didn't have to do any of that.
Yeah.
And he...
Midwest winters aren't a joke.
No. And then he could tell, like, all of us were too shy to ask. He's like, "So do you guys want to do pictures now?" And then we did, and it was awesome. And he was so nice, and that makes me appreciate his acting even more.
Yeah.
Because he's not naturally that type of person. So that's my quick spiel about bragging about how I met Joel McHale one time.
Episode 5 was the art of Garfunkling, and up until this
I'm gonna
episode,
stop. Yeah.
I was pretty happy with how clever the names of our episodes had been, but I feel like we really took it to the next level with this episode.
It is, without a doubt, my favorite title of any of our episodes. It may be my favorite thing that anything in the world is named at all.
The next episode is also in that ballpark. Like, it's right there, too. Like, this one was so good, you carried the momentum into the next episode.
And then I gave up after that, but that's fine. Because, I mean, after you've dropped the mic, what are you supposed to do? No one picks it back up.
Showmanship, my friend. Showmanship. You hit the high note, and you get out.
That's fair.
So the name thing was great. On top of the name, you also dropped some vocab on us in this episode. Do you want to re-explain to me what the hell verisimilitude is?
Yes.
And why you felt the need to use that word on our show?
Because I'm a pretentious, pompous ass, but also because I very specifically... So the word means just realness to life, basically. And the extent to which, whether it's art or writing or whatever medium you're considering, how much does that reflect real life? It's just kind of something that Community does really well, in my opinion, certainly at least from my perspective. So it was an important word for me to throw in to also make people think that I'm smart. This episode really comes full circle when I introduced the fact that Chevy was in the official music video for Paul Simon's You Can Call Me Al. And that just, again, the attention to detail of that, if that was intentional, blows me away.
So yes, this was also the episode where our intro music was my version of Pierce Your B, which ended up sticking as our permanent intro music. We did keep the Pillar of Garbage cover that I did earlier as our outro music.
Yes.
But I don't know, I like it. Out of all the ones that I tried, it had the right amount of bounce. It wasn't too obtrusive. You know, I just added the one little lead guitar lick over it that isn't really in the song, but you know, it's 4 simple acoustic chords. It's meant to be just a very fun entry-level song. I think their whole band can probably be classified as fun entry-level songs. So
Sure.
Seemed like a really good fit. Let's get into Latin falsus, etc.
Etcetera.
Yeah. I don't think
You're pronouncing it too accurately.
I don't think I've ever been able to do it correctly, but I know I've gotten the spelling right the way that you specified every time. This episode was so much fun for me. I think everyone who listens to the show knows what a huge fan I am of Professor Garrity and of this episode. I think I even chimed in a little in this episode more than I had in others, which still wasn't very much. But later on in bracketology, we really get into this with a lot of other people, and I am not shy about my love for that character or that episode specifically.
That episode, right. Yeah.
There are 2 other things that came out of this episode. I'm going to let you go first. What was your big fun takeaway or your big memorable moment from this episode?
For me, it was not only discussing and entertaining the possibility that Ron Swanson could have been a member of our hypothetical study group, but the fact that you were unable to even listen because you were laughing so hard, which I only found out ex post facto because you told us in very specific detail how hard you were laughing and how it almost killed you laughing that hard.
I had to mute my microphone. I was so not prepared for that. And you guys had come up with other good suggestions. That one was later on in the discussion, which was...
You say later, Ron?
Yes, I did.
Good.
And which well played on Scott's part. But yes, I had to mute my microphone, and I had it muted for the rest of the recording. And as soon as the recording ended, which was quite some time later, I unmuted my, and I was still laughing. I was just beside myself. Silly. I'm someone, I've never even seen the show Parks and Rec. And just from being on the internet, being on YouTube, I've come across, compilations of Ron Swanson or whatever. Apparently had that somewhere in the back of my mind. So when Scott brought that up, I absolutely lost it. I think after the episode, I told you guys I was quitting the show to make a new show called What If Ron Swanson Was on Community?
Yeah. We were scared for a second there.
So you guys definitely lost me in the moment. Almost lost me for good there. It was so good.
But the funny thing is that's what Scott's been off doing this whole time.
We're just waiting for the big premiere, right?
That's right.
He's got the City College cross country team sweating away at the Ron Swanson pod. Oh man, so that was good. And then there was something else you and Scott were talking about, and the discussion is about crossovers, right? Because you guys are talking about Abed on Cougar Town and things of that nature. And you bring up Kramer and Murphy Brown. Your heart was definitely in the right place when you had this suggestion. This was another moment where it wasn't that my mic was muted, but there wasn't really a good moment to hop in live at the time. But you certainly know, anyone who's been part of our Twitter account, our show, probably knows Seinfeld is one of the shows that I love that isn't Community. And the scene that you're describing is actually more meta than you even knew at the time, in a way that I think that Abed would appreciate. What actually happens is Kramer, the character in Seinfeld, goes to California to become an actor.
Oh, man.
He gets hired as an actor to act as a different character, Stephen Snell, on the show Murphy Brown. So he is playing the actor Stephen Snell on the show Murphy Brown on the show Seinfeld. You were so on that more than you even knew at the time or could verbalize. Like, it was so perfect and such a great response. Later
I'm so glad you've done the homework on this 8 months later. This is amazing.
I never watched Murphy Brown, but I was watching a Seinfeld documentary, and apparently later on they did return the favor, and I think Larry David and Jerry went on the Murphy Brown show. I didn't those other meta layers, but I think they were. She was getting them to write a script or something. Anyway, yeah, it was very, very 90s foundational meta shenanigans being laid there that Community definitely, perfected later on down the road, I would say.
That's incredible. Sometimes it's better be lucky than good.
So we've got episode 7, which was Professing Our Love. Right off the bat, you working in Trent Reznor, as we were talking about Ludwig Göransson and EGOT considerations. Huge brownie points for me. Huge Trent Reznor fan. Probably not surprised to hear any producer say that, but this might be the only show where, certainly the only show I've heard Trent and Ludwig discuss together. So that was a fun moment for me.
Yeah.
What stood out to you in this episode?
I just very fondly remember. So anytime you tell Scott something he doesn't know, and I mean this in the best way possible, he's kind of like a dog insofar as it blows his mind and he just gets super excited. And I didn't see him at the time, but I imagine he was running circles around the room because he was so excited. When I mentioned the story that I had heard about Danny Pudi being in The Winter Soldier and how originally there was supposed to be a fight scene in all of this, I think I wrinkled his brain, and he was very appreciative for it.
That was something that I also learned when you brought it up on the podcast that day. Another takeaway that I had, and it's slightly on a tangent, it's toward the end of the episode, but we get to a point where even though this is not an episode where we're specifically discussing the beginner pottery episode, you have your own ghosting story, basically.
Yeah,
which
I do.
I'd completely forgotten. You have your own ghosting story, and it's amazing. And I think we need to re-listen to it right now.
I don't think I would have taken beginner pottery, despite your assessment that he could have taught a mindfulness present class. I feel like I now am missing out on this semester already.
I tell you what, I took a pottery class one time and it was terrible. It's funny, my pottery teacher also had just one rule, and it wasn't no ghosting. It was don't throw clay. And inevitably I threw clay one day, and it was seriously the only day the entire quarter that he came out, and I apologized profusely. And I got a B minus in that class because he never forgot that I broke the one rule from his class.
So you didn't ghost anybody?
I didn't ghost anyone, no, but I nearly became a ghost because this man was notorious back in the day for getting rowdy and clearing out a bar if he felt like it. He could have torn me limb from limb if he wanted.
So a shout out from me to Mr. Vitt for teaching that pottery class and for putting just the fear of God into me. And also, I would like to condemn my friend Sarah for being the one who threw the clay first and not getting caught. And yeah, she is the reason that I got a B in pottery.
All right, I feel like credit has been given here. Let's talk about our last two episodes from our season 1, which was 2020. We had Jen on to discuss the Halloween episodes, Jen from the Community Rewatch podcast, and we had Dom on from the Dom and Andre podcast to discuss the Christmas episodes. You know, there were a lot of good moments from both of these. This was a really interesting time transitionally in our podcast because this 8th episode was our first guest with Jen. It was also our last episode with Scott.
Yes.
So, you know, then we had that next episode where we didn't have Scott. We had Dom on as a guest, but I really hadn't stepped out from the booth yet. So it ended up kind of being, you know, you were hosting with the guest Dom, and I was still kind of playing the same position. So these were kind of the, you know, the season finale build-up for our season 1. Was there anything from these episodes that, you know, particularly stood out for you or was super memorable?
You know, as we're trying to build a name for ourselves and for our podcast, it really meant a lot to have both Jen and Dom come on the show because we're still trying to figure things out. We don't know exactly what's going on, but, you know, Scott had put out some feelers in the Twitter community, and it was just so gracious for Jen to, you know, acknowledge, hey, these guys are up and comers and I want to help out any way that I can. And just really, wow, how much fun is it talking to her? Like, anytime that she's been on the show, it's just been such a joy to work with her. And she's brilliant at what she does. And her podcast is incredible as well. So, yeah, it's just game recognized game, I guess, is what I would say about that in general. But just, yeah, the depth for both of them, for both Dom and Jen, I felt like they are very well practiced in a depthful conversation, which, I don't know, I tend to kind of gloss over things and do more of a surface level analysis, but just for them to add that third dimension, so to speak, and to really dive into characters and how does this work in this episode versus another episode was just really a refreshing talk for me because everyone else in my life doesn't want to hear me talk about Community anymore.
Yeah, and I'll just tack on to that I really think we grew from having them on as guests. I think we've grown from everyone we've had onto the show because...
Oh, no doubt.
Anytime you bring on someone else and their perspectives and, you know, give them a chance to speak and listen, how can you not have takeaways from that? Things that we want to do better, either actively or passively. It's contagious. And, you know, that really... I wasn't super nervous going into having guests, but... I certainly, after the fact...
Realize how nervous you should have been?
No, not even so much that. Just, I didn't realize what a tremendous experience it actually would be. And...
Right.
That it would be a very natural thing and a very easy thing to talk to these people that we share one very important passion with, you know, that has all these different layers. So that definitely...
Speaking into microphones.
Definitely
oh, no, the community thing.
Me to continue... having guests on, and it was around this time also that you and Scott started going on other shows as well.
Correct.
So this was a very important time of growth for us. In the 8th episode, the Halloween episode with Jen, I do want to replay this for our listeners because Jen was gracious enough not just to come on and talk to us about all the Halloween episodes, but decided to give her very own impromptu TED Talk in Apartment 303.
I'm so glad you dove into that.
And I really always feel like, man, people get to hear me complain about a lot of things. Why do they listen to our show? It's 2 hours of me complaining about stuff. But that was kind of my jam back when I was writing about the show. Like, that's why people read my reviews, because I was not afraid to kind of be critical of a show. It's okay. It's okay, guys. It's okay to criticize something you love. They're not mutually exclusive. You can love something and also think that it can improve. That's my TED Talk.
Thanks for coming to my
You're
TED
welcome.
Talk.
Thank you for coming to this TED Talk at Apartment 303. Good night.
And I don't think I can say it any better than that, so we're just going to leave Jen with the last word there. For our regionals episode, before we get to the year of our Lord 2020 here, there were two other things I wanted to address. So you and Dom were having a discussion about the tiers of singers when it came to actors and actresses in the show, right?
Correct.
And you put Danny in the top tier.
I did.
Now that we're revisiting this all this time later, is that an opinion that you would like to revive?
You know, it is not. I'm comfortable in saying that, and it's all just relative to my own singing capabilities, I think. So I would listen to Danny sing.
I think
all day, every day.
All right, well, I'm going to respectfully disagree. I think
that's fine.
No, I think putting him in the same category as Yvette and Donald is very silly, and I would say the same thing for Annie. I would definitely have a separate tier there for those two that are not anywhere close to the same tier of Donald and Yvette.
So you would just have another higher tier up top.
Sure.
Okay.
Let's do this I can go with that. Let's do this with max positivity. The amendment I would make is I would elevate those two to an S tier, way above the rest. You can leave Danny in the A tier.
Perfect. That's okay.
We don't have to knock him down.
That's right.
Okay, and so the last thing I'll say, the last sass from season 1, Arizona is not a friggin' palomino. Well, obviously, but it's also not a palindrome.
No, it's obviously not. But in my defense, I had Changnesia at the time.
No, you were quoting Chang, but it's funny because I know that line, but it wasn't until I was re-listening to our show where I actually was like, wait a second, that's not even close.
No, it's not.
Because you think the punchline is, he's saying Arizona or Palomino instead of palindrome, but then
right. It's a double, yeah.
I just want to go on the record that it is not, and we are aware of the fact that it is not. All right, so season 2 of our show, January 1st of 2021. We dropped Premiere Narcissism, questionable openings. You made a case for Jeff. The one thing I want to chime in on this episode is regarding the questionable openings part of the title.
I'm glad that you're bringing this up to the fore.
Okay. I don't know if you were going to have the gumption to do it or not, but I'm going to get there first. So in January, I had also produced a World of Warcraft podcast called Roundtable Report, and it just so happened that both of the episodes were being released on the same day. It just so happened that both of the episodes were 1 hour and 4 minutes long. Just so happened that I had been up for 18 hours, probably a little sleep deprived. Was like, you know what, I just want to upload this, get this done. So I upload the podcast, play it, I hear the advertisement start, and I'm like, all right, we're good, whatever. Turns out what I had uploaded was actually not the file for our podcast. It was the file for Roundtable Report. And thankfully, I woke up about 3 hours later and had a bunch of... Not a bunch. Let's just say there were some very good friends in the community podcasting circle who reached out to me and were like, hey, did you know that your episode is not what you say it is? I was able to immediately switch it and fix it. I don't know. They may have been the only two people who ever noticed. This happened between 3 and 8 a.m. on the day of release. But originally questionable openings wasn't part of the title, even though we were talking about season opening episodes. But after I actually literally botched the technical launch of the episode, that had to be included.
Yeah, and that story that you tell, yeah, okay, we made a mistake, that happens, whatever. But for me, the take home is now and always was, is clear as day for those of us who are in podcasting. We know all the support that we got from other podcasters, and that's just been such a tremendous joy of doing this for the last year. getting to know those folks better and genuinely feeling like they have your back.
No, that was a good feeling. You know, I woke up, obviously I was annoyed, disappointed that I had done that, but my overwhelming takeaway was like, oh, no, this is good. Like, people have my back. But we rolled with it, and I got to tell you, I think the episode title turned out better for it. So
I think you're right.
All right, so we really stepped things up in the next episode with supporting cast support.
Yes.
Because not only do we discuss just a plethora of lesser known, lesser appreciated characters from the show in contrast to the case you made for Jeff comprehensively in the previous episode. And then we had Darsan Solomon on.
Yes.
Which was our first, you know, we had Jen on, we had Dom on, and I was kind of starstruck by them just because they were podcasters who were already established with successful shows people were listening to. But obviously having the opportunity to have an actor on who was actually on the show was a huge, huge step. And so I was very full of butterflies for that episode. I do think that we probably came off just a hair too bootlicky.
One of us did.
But I don't know. I think that was the side of caution I had to err on that day.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
As I transitioned to speaking for myself and not the both of us. But anyway. That was a great time. He was very gracious with his time that day. There were a lot of great things. I could have probably included everything he said on that episode in our highlights reel here. But the one I really wanted to include was he told us a story about when he was there to record the finale. They kept rewriting his scenes.
Yeah.
And eventually he revealed the reason that was, and it was because they wanted to get Seth Green in the finale. So I'll stop telling the story there and let Darsan tell you the rest of it.
And now I'm thinking about the series finale. Fun fact about that, our shooting schedule got totally thrown off. It was pretty normal for us to go overtime on shooting Community regardless, just because of Dan's creative process. But for that one, I got there, it was probably about 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. And right when I got there, there's a script rewrite. So I thought, okay, so I was learning the new lines, the new scene, and then I'm sitting in my room for about an hour and a half wondering what the hell is going on. And then finally I get another rewrite, like way after that, and I see, why is Seth Green suddenly here? So it turns out Joel texted Seth in the middle of the day saying, "What are you doing later tonight?" And Seth said, "I don't think I'm doing anything." And Joel said, "You wanted to come by set at some point, right? Just pop by at 7:30. So he shows up and he just wanders into wardrobe wondering why he's there. And they're like, "Oh, so you're in the episode." And he goes, "I have no idea." And then they're going, "Does production know you're here? Does casting know you're here?" And he's like, "No." And they said, "Okay, one sec." So they call the writer's room. They hear that Seth Green is now there. So they just rework the entire scene to put him in it. And that's what the delay was.
I'll be the first to admit that I am not the expert on film and TV that many other people are, but I do kind of feel like that's just kind of Seth Green, right? I feel like that's kind of how he ended up in all of his shows.
He just showed up, right place, right time.
I mean, even his lead roles, I feel like he just showed up on the day and was like, "Hey, let's do this," right?
Yeah.
So yes, and I stick by my analysis that I surmise that is how Seth Green has gotten all of his roles. So no shade. I think that's a compliment, but
no, I couldn't disagree with a word of that. Another quick point about this episode and how it contrasts from the previous one. Not only talking about Jeff as a singular character, but that was pretty didactic. And we were just trying to figure out and finding the footing for how to move forward in Scott's absence. And that was basically Adam's TED Talk on this stuff about Jeff. And that really changed because in this episode, we actually engaged in a really good use of Twitter as a medium and got a lot of terrific feedback. And that made it such more of a joy to record that episode than like, oh, this is what Adam thinks about this. And I'm the only one with a microphone and no one can really say anything about it.
Yeah, we had dozens of responses from people who weren't just voting in a poll, who were, actually responding to our inquiry. It was great having to go through all of those and figure out, what we wanted to include on the show. And this was a very important episode, not just on the back end from having Darsan, but talked about toward the end of our season 1, Scott stepped away, But then we had guests for those last 2 episodes, right? Well, first
Right.
episode of season 1, we didn't have Scott, and we didn't have a guest. So that was the first episode where it was just a 2-man show. And I was still very much dipping my toes in at that point, you know?
Right.
So that did end up being like that, but that was also kind of by design. You know, we want to have different forms of content and different ways to enjoy Community, right? And
Yes.
I wanted to do that kind of a deep dive, comprehensive, we'll use your word, didactic take on Jeff, because I think the character deserves that. And I think that was a good time in the show to do it. I wouldn't want to do that all the time, but I like where that fit in terms of our overall arc. The next episode, getting back in with the Twitter followers, getting all that feedback, I was more active. We had an actor from the show on for all of those insights that we never, you know, all of our analysis and rankings could have never provided the insights that he provided, having, you know, literally been there behind the scenes. So that was an amazing experience. I do think that, you know, kind of like I said about some of the other episodes, I think it's going to be a great moment of growth. I think that next time we're in the situation to have someone from the show on, that experience is going to go a long way toward getting the most out of that. After that episode, I really felt like I'm happy with what we're doing. We've survived some change. I'm happy with some of the growth, but we need to do something big and ridiculous a la Community. You know, we need to do paintball.
Yeah.
We need to crank it up to 12. And
Yeah.
at this point, I was like, Adam, you know what? We don't have Scott. I don't have another guest lined up right away. Like, what do you want to do for the podcast? That's when you came up with a thing.
Well, I had come up with the thing before and maybe kept it under wraps just a little bit. But yeah, I love you referring to 6 seasons as a bracket as our paintball, because it really was. And it was big and crazy and audacious and fun. And we did what we thought we wanted to do. And sure enough, Dom says, wait a second, you all got this whole thing wrong. And you had the brilliant idea to say, okay, well, if it's wrong, come on our show and talk about it and tell us why it was wrong. So that created the entire outline, gave us the blueprint for how the next 2 months were going to be on the show. And it was so much fun, and it was such a deep dive, and it was all just opinion based, but listening to people talk about that with the depth and love that they have for the show, just like we do, it ended up being a really great way to continue branching out to fellow podcasters and other folks in the community as well.
Yeah, the project. So I've always had the approach, and I always told you and Scott, and then you know, I don't want to have arbitrary limits on how often we're putting out shows or how long the episodes have to be. There are general things that we've tried to do. We tried to put out an episode, you know, every 2-3 weeks, not go more than a month. You know, we try to keep episodes between 30 and 60 minutes, but, you know, I've always kind of tried to have the philosophy of I will let the momentum resolve itself, right?
Right.
And so when you first came to me with the idea of doing a bracket for Community episodes, it was in the context of, hey, for our next episode, let's do an episode on a bracket episode. And as we started getting into the project, right away we realized, I think the first slippery slope, you were like, so how would you feel about maybe going over an hour on this episode?
Right.
That was how you approached it. And then I was like, you know, maybe we could break it up into 2 episodes, which became, we're going to break it up into 4 episodes, one for each bracket. And then, like you said, after we did the first one, and Dom reached out, and we were just going to see what Dom had. Like, when we got with Dom, it was like, you know, if you've got 10 minutes, like, whatever. And we got a whole episode out of it. We basically...
We did.
It was amazing. Yeah, and that definitely inspired me to then want to do basically rebuttal episodes for the others. So what started out as a singular episode that was squeezed into, okay, we'll go over an hour, became, we put out 10 episodes, I think, in a month.
Yeah, and we also had the last half of the February episode talking about the bubble teams / bubble episodes. And then we broke down our methodology a little bit in another bonus episode. So it really, the momentum took over. And I'm so glad that we let that happen instead of say, nope, this is a one-off. This is just what we're doing here. And I think that was the best enjoyment and most joy that we've gotten out of this show for my money.
Yeah, it's really hard to say that it was a peak because, since 6 seasons in a bracket, we've only really done one episode. So it's hard to look back with too much hindsight just because there hasn't been that much space yet. But man, it was an amazing experience. Yes, I worked my ass off in February and in March and in April. What was supposed to be like a March episode started in February. I think we released our final results announcement on May 1st. And it wasn't because we were drawing things out. It was a jam-packed, almost 3 months of March Madness. So it was truly mad. There were a lot of highlights from the bracketology episodes. I don't want to replay too many of them here because, like I just mentioned, those episodes are a lot closer to where we are in real time than a lot of episodes we've been talking about that were farther in the past. But there are a couple things that I really do want to make sure get brought back out here because, they were highlights of the first year of the show and are moments that I will always cherish for sure. I'm glad you brought up the LeVar thing. I was definitely going to, but rather than talk more about that episode, I will use my remaining time to share the message from the back of that signed LeVar photo, if you will indulge me. I truly believe that our thoughts influence what we experience in life. Do yourself a favor and spend at least one moment today thinking of our world as a safe, healthy, and wonderful place to be. In the light, LeVar.
So 2 and 3 have to go against each other, cooperative calligraphy versus remedial chaos, and I have to go with cooperative calligraphy.
Basic Sandwich is such an interesting episode. Oh, that's even harder. That's the...
I was afraid of that.
Yeah. I want to say Basic Sandwich would probably move on.
And then you had a fistful of paintballs versus remedial chaos theory.
RCT. And then...
Okay. RCT or Basic Sandwich. Do it.
No! Oh, no. Reluctantly, I'm going to have to say RCT.
Hey, all right.
I think out of the first bracket, Modern Warfare wins. I just think it's too, for me personally, it's the reason I watch Community. I can't imagine, for me, the bracket going any differently. And I think for the fandom, Contemporary American Poultry might be close, but Football Feminism U for many is a great episode. But I think Modern Warfare ends up winning. For your second bracket, I don't know how anybody gets through the second and third brackets. Just personally, I don't know how it would happen. I could make an argument for about a dozen, but ultimately I think of those episodes, I think Advanced Dungeons and Dragons would be the chalk that would carry. I don't know for sure with your bracket, but I definitely think it's an excellent episode. The Lost Pen episode maybe, or Conspiracy Theories. There's so many good options from season 2. I don't think there's any bad choices. And from season 3, it's Remedial Chaos Theory. Maybe just because it may be the best episode of television that ever exists.
Remedial Chaos Theory, the episode that gave you the title of this podcast, is going to have to be the number one for me.
I fully appreciate that meta observation right there. This, of course, is the podcast based on the apartment in which Troy and Abed live, introduced to us in Remedial Chaos Theory.
Wait, is it 303 or is it 304?
It's
303. I wrote it
303.
down.
We've got regionals against our other digital episode now, Exploration of Interior Design.
Congratulations to the two digitals for making it to...
I didn't see that coming, but it's been hard for me to keep track, extra hard, that it played out that way. Believe that.
I could not say the general words you say for the final four. Oops. The fearsome foursome is what is what we will call it here. Yes. So, oh man, Adam, do you have one among these you favor strongly?
So for me, I am it's weird that my bracket doesn't look like this, but I am on the subway train. I think for me that beats out regionals only because some of the things that you mentioned earlier, right? You're weighing, okay, this is a Community homage episode, or they're really sticking it to Glee, or it's a Christmas episode. And none of those things are inherently bad. But when I think about the absolute favorite episodes that I have, it involves something a little bit more universal than what my calendar says. So I love regionals. It's maybe a funnier episode. I think you could argue that. But in terms of the episode I like best, I would go Digital Exploration.
I simply cannot abandon the subway train now. So, a Digital Exploration.
Oh my god. Fucking eat fresh. All right.
Eat fresh!
I'm just going to point out that you said subway train, and that was like not... I mean, you're either super brilliant in ways that I'm not, or like that came up organically.
It came up organically.
Oh, what? It came up organically.
All right, so here's where everything gets real. Everything hits the fan now because the subway train, as it were, is now crashing into Remedial Chaos Theory for the ultimate champion of this season, of this region of the bracket. So where do you guys weigh in here?
Both great episodes. I love them a lot. Almost as much as I love the fact that we just renamed this the Fearsome Foursome. We're running with that. So my vote, Fearsome Foursome, is Remedial Chaos Theory. We've talked a lot about both of these episodes at this point, but it's sometimes there's an episode that's so funny, and not even necessarily an episode, any type of comedy that's so funny that I don't laugh. And this fits that bill. I rewatched it yesterday, and it's just so conceptually hilarious that I'm just like shaking my head in envy or disbelief. It's just that funny for me. And Digital Exploration is all of the things we say it is, but it's not quite that level.
I feel no shame in getting off the subway at this stop. Because what a fight it's had to get to the 14th seed of 16, running up to the number 2. I didn't
see it coming.
You know, Rocky went all 15 rounds. He didn't win, but he went all 15 rounds with the champ. He went the distance. So yeah, it's Remedial Chaos Theory. It's one of the finest pieces of writing, directing, acting, visual effects, like in the history of television. Like, it's all working as this perfect Swiss watch. It's a miracle that it's good, that it's not only like arguably the best episode of Community. It's a miracle it makes any sense at all. It's a miracle that you can follow it, that you can like understand what's going on, that they fit it into 21 and a half minutes
and
of television.
Not having needed to watch the show to understand and follow it. That was the first episode of Community I ever watched.
Right, and then after all that, to stick it with this like incredible end tag, which like we haven't really factored into the episode rankings, but like that's a legendary end tag. The This Year Got Dark, May Pierce Rest in Pierce. You know, like just it's all these hits, the Darkest Timeline iconography, like it all comes from here. It's Remedial. I'm not surprised. This is what I thought would happen, but there were a lot of upsets along the way.
At the end of the day, when it all comes down to it, we end up at a place where I don't see how you cannot crown Remedial Chaos Theory as the champion. There are clearly a second tier of episodes that can be argued for that next spot, but it really seems like, you know, my suspicions have been confirmed throughout this process. No one is willing to argue that Remedial Chaos Theory is not the best episode. Like I said, a lot of people came close. There were some other episodes that performed amazingly, but at the end of the day, you know, we have all these episodes say, well, you know, had X or Y gone differently, they could have gone all the way. Well, you can't say that about Remedial Chaos Theory.
So I guess then it is with great pleasure that we have to present the Luis Guzman IMDb Memorial Trophy to Remedial Chaos Theory. It's tough, maybe even more challenging, like in a real basketball tournament when you know for sure that you're the top seed. There's a little additional pressure there. But yeah, Remedial Chaos Theory is the 2012 Kentucky Wildcats. Everyone knows they're the best. Everyone's playing for second place. And you're just happy if you play them in a close game because it's just an unstoppable force. And everyone had that suspicion. Like we said, 9 out of 9 podcasters, or 8 out of 8, and then the official results agreed. For anything on the internet to win a competition 75 to 25% is very telling. And again, especially because that's a really, really good episode that it beat. The community loves an underdog because that's what the show has been the whole time. But in this case, there is a clear winner. And I think we have spent the last 4 or 5 years here on this podcast thoroughly vetting that result.
It has been a crazy adventure. We appreciate you guys coming along for this ride. It went a lot of ways that I didn't expect. Like I said, outside of this champion itself. But no surprises here on my end if we're looking at the overall champion. It was, as we've mentioned, the first episode I actually saw of the show. It's certainly one of the first episodes I would recommend to trying to hook someone new into the show. And it holds its weight. No matter what context you present it in, it comes out on top. So to crown any other episode champion, I think would have been folly. That being said, many of the twists and turns along the way may have been, but I think everyone ended up in the same place to the largest extent here.
I think so. I think that for as many different coals as we've raked and as many different hot takes as we've had, this was the fairly obvious choice. And I did want to point out, again, you watch this episode and every time you do, you find something new. And this is probably a really easy point that I just missed initially, but in any timeline, including the darkest, Troy and Abed are still friends.
And so then, after all of this, I was in a place where it was like, okay, hashtag 6 seasons in a bracket is over. We still have this community podcast, but what do we do from here? Like, how do we transition out of being a full-time, 40 hours a week dedicated to made-up community bracket rankings? But I gotta tell you, I really was happy with the All 5 Dances episode.
Yeah.
It was kind of a premise, a throwaway line that we had talked about throughout the course of doing all the brackets, not really realizing how it would manifest itself. And then in preparation for doing the episode, realized that the journey to figure that out was the episode.
Right. And in true Greendale fashion, it was, oh, okay, here's this thing, whatever, no big deal. You go to commercial break and come back and it's taken over the entire podcast. It was really rewarding for me to go through and do that and do some sleuthing and find out, hey, there's not a set consensus on this. Because if it has not been resolved on Reddit, I'm afraid to say it's not been resolved in real life. So that, for me, was really interesting to have this idea and then also realize that that's kind of, it's adding to the discourse.
Yeah, we added a ton of opinions in 6 seasons in a bracket, and we sussed out opinions from every corner of the community, but it was weird to go on the internet and look for just an answer to something and then realize that it hadn't really been properly dealt with.
Yeah.
So that was exciting. What was kind of originally in my head supposed to just be like a nice, unambitious, relaxy-taxy debriefing from 6 seasons in a bracket ended up being some of our best journalistic work, I think, over the last year.
I would happen to agree, Hawkeye.
So we have covered a ton of fun moments from our podcast over the last year, as well as some fun moments that we had guesting on other podcasts. But earlier this year, there was another event that we were really lucky to be a part of. Alex from 6 Seasons in a Podcast, as well as Matt from Communities, set up a conversation where you and I, along with some of the other community podcasters, got the opportunity to sit down on the Zoom call and interview Danielle Kaplowitz, famous for playing Vicky on our favorite show here. And that was such an incredible experience. We would be completely remiss not to include it in the highlights of our first year adventuring this community. So I have a ton of things that I want to get to. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but just to kick things off, Adam, I want you to chime in here. Were there any huge takeaways, or where do you want to get started with the Zoom call?
Well, it's one of those things that we were presented an opportunity to speak with someone from the show, and that's just amazing. When you start off a podcast, at least I didn't have that level of ambition to assume that we would be able to do that, but we did. You know, it was such an awesome opportunity. It was so much fun, and Danielle was so grateful for us as fans, and I was so grateful just for the time that we got to spend talking with her about, you know, her role in one of our most favorite shows and in some of our favorite episodes. And it, for me, was a larger scale, obviously, than when you and I interviewed Darsan, but it was kind of that same caliber. And it was just so much fun to be able to do.
Yeah, it was a really great experience. And I don't want to get too far, and I don't want to bury the lead here. There were a few highlights I want to take out, but for me, the huge takeaway, not even the takeaway, but the highlight of the whole thing for me was when you got the chance to chime in with your question, and you asked her about the deleted scene with Neil.
We have Adam and Dave from Apartment 303 podcast. So you guys have any questions?
Yeah, you had mentioned,
Yeah.
Adam, you can go.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, now that there's not children screaming here, it's a good time for me to talk.
So that's what I figured.
You've got them muffled now.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about a lot of questions I had written down, so thanks for taking the time to answer these, of course. But I think that maybe the most incredible deleted scene features Vicky, and I'm sure you know the one I'm talking about. It takes place the camera footage in Shirley's Sandwiches, and where
We
does
make
everyone know
out?
what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, you
Yeah,
guys
and there's a
have
line of
that?
dialogue.
It's on the internet.
Yeah, it's on the internet.
Oh yeah.
What the F?
Adam,
Sorry.
I know you're on the phone, but she looks mortified right now.
Where
Oh
is it?
boy.
It's a deleted scene from that season.
I have to see
It's on the
They
internet.
they put that on like out?
Yeah.
Or somebody
Yeah.
just-
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's on the
I mean, I'm
disc.
fine with it. Obviously, I did it thinking it was gonna be on television, but like, I just truly can't believe that it exists. Why am I so naive? Yeah, we did that.
Yeah, I think that's highlighted a lot of what we talked about earlier with Neil as the romantic, because I
Mhm.
think there's a line of dialogue where you tell him to cut the foreplay and he says he's not a machine, which again,
Forgot about
if
that.
that had gotten on network television, that would have just been incredible. And Community
I
slid a
agree.
lot of things like that in there. I just wanted to know if that was a favorite memory of yours, or if you had something else that you enjoyed more than that.
Well, okay. That was so I remember us both, we were good friends at that point, like worked together plenty of times, but I remember us being a little nervous about that. Not like to the point where we weren't gonna do it, but we were just like, okay, we're doing this. It was actually fine. I think we had to do it 2 or 3 times. I can't believe it exists and that people have seen it. I actually always wanted to kind of see it, but not really. But like I always wanted to I was like, you know what I mean? I was just like, oh, I guess it'll be on TV. It'll be fine. But then when it wasn't, I wasn't sad. I was like, okay. What do you want to know about it?
Oh yeah, just that's a highlight of amongst all of the deleted scenes for us in the fandom. Did you have any other scenes that didn't make it that you were really proud of, or just any other scenes that you were in that you really look back fondly and think, boy, that was an especially great time?
Oh, I mean, I always talk about like my favorite episode to film that I had the most fun on, even though it was super cray, like really crazy, was paintball of the second season. It was crazy times when that was all going on and for lots of different reasons, but I had so much fun filming them.
Apparently, this was something she was not really aware was out there for the general fandom. So that whole moment was really great. Not just that we were able to be interacting with someone from the show, but that you were able to point something out to her that obviously she was aware of the scene because, you know, she was there for it, but wasn't aware that that was something that had been put out there.
Yeah, for me, that was one of the highlights, not only of this specific interaction, but in doing the show together. Just since becoming a podcast, that was one of my all-time favorite moments. I was in Yosemite National Park at the time, so I had to call in by phone. I did not get to see her reaction, but you clued me in at a very early stage. Like, hey, you've got to watch this, because she is visibly shaken by this news. So I took great pride in that.
Yeah, but before there was an opening for her to speak in the conversation, you could see it on her face. So I was able to really enjoy that before it had clicked for you. We actually had very different experiences on this call. Like you mentioned, you were literally phoning it in, so you weren't there to see people's reaction, nor were people there to watch yours. And when I go back and rewatch this, watching the various reactions is something that I really get a lot of enjoyment out. In a lot of the same ways when I go back and watch episodes of Community, you know all the lines by heart a lot of the times, but even on a rewatch several times in, watching how the different characters are reacting to those lines in various ways and scenes is always something I find enjoyable. So I would say that was definitely the biggest highlight, but there were definitely some other moments from that I really enjoyed. Alex from the Straight Up Community, I know we mentioned earlier, you were a guest on his show. He was one of the other podcasters here, and with Vicky, basically worked out a pitch where we were discussing, what her future could be like, and suffice to say, we came up with a sitcom spinoff where Vicky was a big, powerful, successful businesswoman, and Neil was a stay-at-home dad of 5. I'm not sure we'll ever get to that level of awesomeness in this world where we get Community spinoffs. Being able to entertain that was really fun for me.
Yeah, well, when we see it in the upcoming movie, we'll know the genesis of it was this.
Could be the B plot, for sure. Could definitely be the B plot. But yeah, we have to give a huge thanks, like I said, both to Alex and Matt. I think Alex was mostly responsible on the front end insofar as getting Danielle lined up. They both did a great job during the call. It went so smoothly for having that many different people. I was really impressed. I was afraid going into it that there was going to be more of a challenge of not talking over each other, just things of that nature, logistical issues, and we were really fortunate on that day to not really have too much of that happen. But like I said, Matt was really responsible for bringing it all together in the back end. A couple of us did take recordings, and Matt was the mastermind who put them all together and edited the final product that you can now see on the community's YouTube page, and has obviously been linked to across all of our Twitter accounts here. So, was there anything else that you wanted to make sure we don't leave out here?
I think just the fact that speaks to how lovely of a community of people we have built or has been built, in that it would be easy for Matt and for Alex to say, okay, this is great, I have access to this person, let me interview them, let me speak to them and do it for my own gain. Everyone else, you're on your own. But the fact that they are willing to share that with other podcasters, it's not competitive in that sense, and it's collaborative. And I think that is very special about the podcasting community. And I don't know that you'd necessarily see that with other sitcoms. And just pure speculation and conjecture, but it was great to be a part of anyway.
Well, I will definitely entertain that speculation. I'm sorry I wasn't a little more aggressive here because that was such a nice tight winger speech to wrap this up, but I do want to sneak in a couple things real quickly before we move on here. One of which was she was asked about her first episode, which had her acting opposite Chevy Chase. She was asked, was there ever a discussion about filming a scene where you stab him in the face with a pencil? And her response was no, but then under her breath was like, although I really wish there had been. So I really got a kick out of that. The whole thing, they were really careful not to. It was a very positive experience. We didn't bag on Chevy or anything like that, but I did enjoy that moment of honesty. It seemed like kind of bled through there. And then I want to close with this, kind of to bring things full circle. In this call, Vicky was asked a question, which not only harkens back to that, but harkens back to one of our other first episodes where we were entertaining the prospect of having characters from the shows on Community.
Adam here from Apartment 303. Supposing there is a movie, and supposing that Vicky is cast into the movie, can you think of anyone who you would like to make a cameo, an actor that has not previously been on this show, who might be really fun to work with?
I mean, my dream in life is to work with Jerry Seinfeld, but but I don't know if he would fit into Community, although it would be so funny if he just showed up and just was like, what's the deal with this? I think that would be my favorite, my most exciting person to show up, or Bette Midler.
You guys Jerry would have to come on playing a Jerry Seinfeld impersonator, but actually being Jerry Seinfeld.
Wait, that's genius. Pitch it. That's great.
We could go a step further. We could get Bette Midler on as a Jerry Seinfeld impersonator being coached by Jerry Seinfeld.
Well, that is so good. That's perfect.
You had the perfect setup, and she delivered it home for me, and I love that. I wasn't expecting her to say that, but it was a fun answer. And then she actually continued on, and there was a little bit of back and forth about it being meta and having Bette Midler in there, who, of course, also was in an episode of Seinfeld. I just thought that was really awesome. You know, it's not a huge surprise. You know, she's probably closer to our age group than
some of those other whippersnappers on there.
Yeah, some of those other whippersnappers. No, I would guess that on average, the age group that, you know, that has Seinfeld as a wheelhouse is slightly older than those of us who have Community. Although obviously there's a huge crossover there. But anyway, I thought that was pretty exciting for me personally, and a really fun way to kind of bookend things here as far as our weaving adventures have taken us. There are a ton of moments that probably deserve to have been mentioned here that haven't been, but, you know, we don't want to do a 10-hour podcast reliving, you know, every single moment. We want to keep it nice and crisp here and talk about the highlights. So we really appreciate all the support that you guys have given us throughout the last year. The follows, the listens, all of that has really, at least for me, been inspirational. And for a project that I was passionate about when I started, I found that, you know, over the course of engaging with it for the past year, my passion is even higher. So I can't thank you enough, Adam, the rest of the community podcasters, and all of the fans.
So what you're saying is that you, with this experience, would be able to open the door in Greendale's subcellar and get us out of there because of the robot with the gold circuitry.
Yes, because of my emotions. And then we'll have all the gold, so that'll also be good.
Perfect. Well, you know, thank you, and I appreciate you genuinely having that reaction, but I want to share a quick story that I've not told you deliberately, and in true community clip show fashion, this is going to be new information. So I guess it was about 6 weeks ago in that neighborhood somewhere. I was in Portland actually to go visit Scott, and went out on a run with his running group, and happened to be just, you know, chugging along with some folks, trying to make conversation, all this stuff. And this guy, Jeff, is like, man, your voice sounds really familiar. Where do I know you from? I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't think we've met before. And then a quarter mile up the road, he's like, oh my gosh, you did that podcast. I listened to your podcast. I listened to Apartment 303 and I recognize you by your voice. And I was so humbled by that, even though, you know, it's just one of Scott's friends. It was just really cool that someone recognized me by voice. And like, that's just an awesome thing that I'll always appreciate that. So thanks, Jeff, for that. And thanks, Scott, for introducing him. And it just, you know, adds to the discourse and makes you feel like you're doing something worthwhile, even if it's not necessary.
Life's going to beat you, but you get to choose how you go through it. Gosh, what a great thing to remind me.